One of the reasons I started this channel is so I could share great content that I find. And so this is the first of what I hope is going to be many videos like this, where I get to share something I'm excited about. And if you like these sorts of recommendations, please let me know that by liking the video or leaving a comment. I really appreciate that sort of feedback. So today I'm recommending the Bulwark podcast from yesterday, March 28th, featuring Charlie Sykes' interview with retired Judge Michael Luttig. I also would recommend the Bulwark podcast in general. I listen to it every day, and I'll do another video at a later date about that podcast. But this interview with Judge Luttig, I thought, was really special. Now, he's highly respected among conservative legal thinkers, but the main reason that most of us know about him is because he played an important role in standing up to Donald Trump's attempts to abuse his power around the January 6th insurrection. And since he's coming from a very conservative Republican perspective, he's able to talk about the erosion of the rule of law to conservatives with credibility that not a lot of people have. So who is he? Judge Luttig was appointed to the federal bench by George H.W. Bush, and he was a protege and a good friend of Justice Antonin Scalia, who's really one of the patron saints of the modern conservative legal movement. And Judge Luttig and Justice Scalia shared a very similar legal philosophy. And one of the gems in this interview is the way that he and Charlie discussed the difference between what people like Judge Luttig mean by a conservative judicial philosophy versus what it's come to mean to many conservatives today. It's really the difference between taking a conservative view of the law in the sense of actually interpreting the words as written, which is the way I always thought about it, versus interpreting the law in such a way as to achieve a conservative political outcome. And the old way of viewing the law conservatively was a protection against judicial activism. But many of these new conservatives simply want to use it for their own Republican version of judicial activism. So in other words, people who thought of ourselves as conservatives looked to conservative justices to protect us from judicial activism, but now we can't really trust people who simply call themselves conservatives not to weaponize the courts for their own political ends. Now, Charlie and Judge Luttig used a lot better words than mine to discuss the issue, so you should listen to them. It was the best explanation that I've heard, and it made sense of a lot of the battles that we've seen in recent years around judges. But the main reason to listen to this interview is to hear Judge Luttig's description of the role that he played in convincing Mike Pence that Pence did not have the authority to throw out electoral votes of the states on January 6th. One of the hardest parts of the past 7 years for me has been seeing one after another of the people that I used to respect show themselves to be fools and cowards in the face of challenges that Donald Trump has presented to conservatives. Almost every time a conservative with any power has been asked to show bravery against the orange God King, they've melted into a puddle. So Trump has been able to capture the conservative movement and the evangelical movement, all for a lack of character in the leaders of those movements. So whenever I do find a conservative who didn't bow the knee to the bronzed Baal from Mar-a-Lago, I feel rejuvenated. And I'm reminded that I'm not alone, and I'm encouraged that there are eminently more qualified people than myself to speak to the Trump supporters in my life. I heard about Judge Luttig first when he made a famous tweet on the eve of January 6th, making it crystal clear that what Donald Trump was asking Mike Pence to do was unconstitutional and extremely dangerous to the rule of law in our country. I didn't follow his story closely at the time. I was just glad that he said what he said and that it apparently had a good effect on Mike Pence. And then when the January 6th hearings came about, I was working during the hearing when he testified, so I didn't get to listen to it. But I heard good things about his testimony. The one rap that I heard on him was that his content was excellent, but he may have trouble holding the attention of the nationwide audience watching the hearings. So, of course, I loved him. I could relate to that entirely. So I was happy to see his name pop up on the Bulwark podcast today, and his message was really clear. Donald Trump and his allies pose a grave threat to the rule of law in our country. And he's not super optimistic that we're going to be able to meet that challenge. But I got more optimistic just hearing him frame the issues and knowing that if certain friends of mine could turn off Fox News for a time and listen to someone like Judge Luttig instead, they'd never again consider voting for Donald Trump or for any of the corrupt politicians who cover for him. So please listen to Judge Luttig's interview on the Bulwark podcast and share it with somebody who needs to hear it. I'll link to the interview in the description below. And thanks for listening.